Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. And welcome back to episode 2 of Bushrangers in the Hunter Valley. In the first podcast, we left Molly Morgan, Joe Hunt, Irish Frank and the Anvil Creek household awaiting the arrival of the bushranger gang, Jacob's Irish Brigade. Drawing on historical records and creative reconstruction, this episode imagines how Jacob's Irish Brigade may have been received by Molly Morgan, on a frontier where survival depended on knowing when to speak and when not to.
The visitors came quietly from the west across the paddocks behind the Anvil Creek homestead. They were on foot and politely knocked on the back door. Molly opened it and greeted them. She invited them to take a seat around the big cedar table. They rapidly downed a few tankards while they ate heartily of the mutton, bread and potatoes that had been prepared and served by Molly's servants. Irish Frank was there to supervise and assuage any possible misunderstandings on both sides. Avoiding eye contact, Molly's male workers lit the oil lamps and remained in the gathering shadows, ostensibly to top up the tankards when required. With their appetites satisfied, the visitors relaxed. It was time for a serious conversation.
Pretty rings you're wearing there, lad,
said Joe lightly, to begin their after-dinner conversation, and indicating the hands of the young bushranger, who had a ring on each finger.
With your permission,
he said as he bowed to Joe and moved towards Molly with an exaggerated smile.
Please accept this simple gift as a token of my gratitude for your present and continuing hospitality.
And taking a silver ring from his little finger, he handed it to Molly. She turned it over in her hands. Molly, too, was smiling graciously. She had learned to give so many socially acceptable smiles in her life. Everyone in the room understood the gesture which the young bushranger was making, and Molly knew the significance of this clatter ring and the consequences of her response, for all of them. Looking directly at the man who appeared to be the leader of the gang, she said,
"But, young man, I'm a farmer and can't do justice to such a pretty thing. My old hands are always in the dirt and slippery from the sweat and muck of caring for horses and animals. Surely you'll find a nice young lady who'll be more able to appreciate its prettiness and meaning."
There was a silence in the darkening room at her seeming rejection of his gift.
Perhaps, ma'am, for you to know us better, we should introduce ourselves more completely. Should we call you Mistress Morgan?
"I am at present, young man, no man's mistress,"
she joked,
"but a legally recognised mistress of my own destiny. I am also this man's wife, though he be called Joe the Marine and Joe Hunt."
Then Mrs. Hunt it is, and apologies to you, sir,
said the man, who was only a couple of years younger than Joe. It appeared that he was prepared to accept the unspoken rules of the game, for the time being. Looking at the man, Joe said,
"No need for apologies here. Each one is called what they choose to be called."
"And by what name should we call you then?"
Molly asked him.
Call me your faithful servant, Patrick Riley,
he said. At least he wasn't lying about that, thought Molly. Irish Frank, her servant, had already told them the leader's name, and Patrick had confirmed it without hesitation.
"What a coincidence! Patrick Riley was the name of the man who chose to escape from Limeburners' camp at Newcastle. He joined the Bushrangers in Van Diemen's Land with the famous Michael Howe. It was also the name of the man who worked with Joe on building Christ Church in Newcastle. He is now a respected settler."
"He's a very good friend and an excellent carpenter. He's one of our neighbours who's settled here in the valley,"
said Joe. Did he need to mention that he was also a constable?
"I only mention his name to make conversation and tell you that there are alternatives to people like us who live here. We have friends from many walks of life,"
said Molly.
Well, I am a simple shepherd,
said Patrick.
The fact that others with my name also ended up here points to the number of good Irishmen who were also banished and persecuted for nothing.
Too right, Patrick,
said the youngest man, who looked to be about 20 years old. Patrick Riley, sitting back in the chair and still seemingly amenable to continuing this charade, indicated to a red-headed man, an Englishman, Aaron Price, to introduce himself.
The ribbons I wear on my chest represent me more than I can tell in fancy words. Patrick here is the one with the gift of the gab, as you may have noticed.
However, Aaron went on.
I will not bother you with the name I was baptised or sentenced with. As we all know, names can come and go, Mrs. Morgan. Mrs. Hunt. My ribbons are green and black. Green like my Irish fellows here, and the honourable institution of the ribbon men, but the black are for my people who suffered and died in England. Commoners we were called because we were able to use the common land allowed us by the landowners in exchange for our work and dedication to the squires and their invisible masters, but they turfed us off. They had to pay their taxes for the wars they got us into, and some of us fought and died in. They complained from their manors and castles that they had to pay to have their lands enclosed, so they couldn't pay their servants or let us use our ancestral lands to make a living. We all had to suffer. We did what they told us to do, but to no good end. Here in New South Wales, we are united in a fight against those who live off our downfall, and still they persecute us.
And he said I was the one with the gift of the gab,
laughed Patrick as the young man finished his introduction. The next bushranger, who did not give his name, simply said in a Belfast accent,
"They used and abused us for trying to survive in Ireland, and then here they flogged and starved us. In Ireland, they put our animals on their ships to England while we starved, and they torched our huts, sometimes with our starving families inside. I say feck 'em all. Excuse me, Molly,"
he said, raising his tankard. And they all drank to that. Even Molly and Joe raised their tankards, as was required. Patrick resumed.
"The gift I have offered you tonight, Mrs. Hunt, this Claddagh ring, represents the Irish contingent, of whom there are many in our gangs. The silver Claddagh design represents loyalty and respect. I have the privilege of having Ireland as my home, and the call to freedom from the English, my cause. I know you to be educated people, and so you may know the history of our fight. This silver Claddagh ring has a heart symbolizing love. It is cupped in the two hands of friendship, topped by a crown. Make no mistake, the crown is not for monarchy, but for greater love and fidelity. I know I am very far from my kin, but I will do what I can to survive, and perhaps those of us who have also been sent here, for God knows what reason, and it is not always noble, will hear of our resistance. And even some of the English, like Aaron here, have joined our cause."
What could Molly say that would ensure safety from these men? Despite her trusted servant Frank's promise, she knew about the vagaries of loyalty, passion, and human nature. Had she learned enough to protect herself and her people by negotiating with these bushrangers at her table? Some settlers and emancipists had suffered from the bushrangers, homesteaders terrified, horses and weapons stolen, and crops burned. Other locals had survived by helping them. Molly had lived for 60 years between the anvil and the hammer, and so far had proven to be malleable enough. Molly Jones, Morgan, Mears, Hunt had been in Britain, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, Spanish Tenerife, Cape Town in South Africa, this colony and its penal settlements. And on her return to England, they had sailed to India and Canton in China. During those 60 years, she had lived on precarious frontiers and negotiated her passage across many borders. From being a child in Shropshire, she'd lived on the English frontier with Wales, which involved conflicting politics with family on both sides. As a nanny in Squire Goff's manor, at first, Molly was allowed to oscillate between the power structures of the poor and the rich. Having already walked to school to cross the barriers of gender and widespread illiteracy, studying to become an educated woman. Beginning in a rural hamlet, she went on to set up a successful business in the megalopolis of London, where others from the countryside perished in textile mills and slums. She'd cultivated friends, supported them, and made her plans. Molly Morgan had also crossed the vast oceans from the northern to the southern hemisphere in death ships 4 times. In the colony where she now lived, she was treated as a convict, and as an emancipist who received land holdings in one of her several names and marital statuses. She had first-hand experience of the frontier wars with the original caretakers of the land. This was an ever more complex battle in which the simplistic dichotomies of friend and foe, black or white, were of little relevance. At this moment, here in her back room at Anvil Creek, she knew about the growing desperation of the bushrangers and the risk to herself and the people who depended on her. She carefully replied,
Patrick, your gesture of friendship is greatly appreciated, as is your cause. I'm impressed by the simple beauty of this ring and your gracious manners. I completely understand what you are offering and what you're asking. However, this homestead is a place of shelter for the people who depend on me. I cannot put them at risk. I have chosen to live on this frontier, this halfway house, in the only manner I know.
Patrick's manners deserted him as he interrupted angrily.
So, you're rejecting my offer and our request for a safe haven and a bit of food, Mrs. Hunt?
He asked as he roughly forced the ring back onto his own little finger.
On the contrary, Patrick, I can only hope to make it clear that living as we do on this, my last frontier, we must continue to be welcoming to all who pass by here.
Speak plainly, madam,
demanded the bushranger known as Paddy Clinch, who was a 28-year-old reaper from Longford. Ignoring him and looking at the leader, Molly said,
We have welcomed your group here this evening and will again if you do us the same courtesy of advising us beforehand. We can then shelter and feed you and your horses and prepare a welcoming, timely repast.
On your other demands?
asked Patrick.
For I'm sure you want more from us.
Joe leant forward, alert in his chair. Meanwhile, 3 more of Molly's people appeared through the small door from the front room, ostensibly to add wood to the fire, clear the table, bring more food, and the famous perry wine, which was made on the premises. Tension in the room had become palpable. The visitors were now effectively outnumbered as her servants retreated into the shadows. Molly went on.
And as is only practical for all of us, we ask that in return you allow this homestead freedom to continue to work and so welcome you.
That sounds reasonable,
Patrick said.
And?
Patrick, we are here at Anvil Creek in this beautiful valley. We live on several frontiers, as you do,
said Molly.
But there are some who have shot at overseers, destroyed homesteads and livelihoods.
what are you accusing us of?
demanded Paddy Clinch. Molly responded.
You all know this valley as well as I do, I'm sure, though most of you are recent arrivals, and you know that this year has been the worst yet for robberies and raids. Many of these raids have taken place from Branxton to Maitland, especially on isolated properties such as this one.
However, we do have Molly's line of road going straight in front of us. People of all types come by here.
Interrupted Joe, who could not be seen to be in a weak position in front of these men.
Indeed,
continued Molly, retaking the reins of the conversation, but glad for Joe's comment and support.
and we need advance notice of visits, as you were so kind to have given us this evening. In the last weeks, our neighbours' properties have been the focus of revenge and hostility.
Revenge is the right word, madam, and be damned to them that treat their own people so cruelly.
Interjected Paddy Clinch.
I suppose you are talking about Reed, that prig. That magistrate sentenced me to 50 lashes for losing 4 sheep. Do you know what 50 lashes looks like on a man's back, Molly?
Asked Patrick angrily.
I'm afraid I do.
Replied Molly quietly.
And as a woman, I have personally seen and felt other types of pain and torture.
I knew you would understand.
Said Patrick.
Yes,
Said Molly calmly.
but some of the gangs are said to have intimidated the wives of other settlers and torched crops and houses. They have also gravely misused the people who first lived here and cared for this land.
Patrick and his men stood suddenly.
Now, gentlemen, calm down and take your seats.
Said Joe, as the servants stiffened in readiness.
We know that there's more than one gang of banditti on our doorstep.
Again, Patrick, we are only trying to tell you about the situation. You said that you need information. We've heard that Captain Allman and some soldiers from Newcastle are in the area. They may visit us here at any time. Let's be direct now. What are you asking of us, Patrick? We cannot put our people in danger. You know what happens to people who are caught helping escapees. We would appreciate any timely information that you might have regarding other hungry men of the bush who might visit us.
That could be arranged as best we can.
Patrick said.
And in return?
Please leave our pastures and horses alone. They support us all here. And if you do this, we will do what we can to give you food, blankets and drink. Let me make it clear to all of you, those who are here and those who are not present. I am not concerned with the rewards being offered by the government. I only want a safe place to live out my declining years in peace with my people.
Patrick laughed amiably at this obvious appeal to his hearty appetite and better nature.
Molly, I know some of your story. I'm sure you'll outlive us all.
Let's drink a toast to that,
said Joe, ever the gentleman, but eyeing them closely.
Perhaps I'd have tried to join you myself some years ago,
Molly said. They smiled at that. More than 30 years separated Molly from almost everyone in the room, but they knew that Molly was a very skilled rider, even at her advanced age. Like everyone here, she had suffered at the hands of the powers that be.
What do you need from us, Patrick?
Molly asked, cutting to the chase.
As you rightly say, Molly, in any war, information is key. And if we could get information from your visitors and from your reading of the papers, we'd appreciate it.
Some bushrangers had formed sympathetic allegiances with people from their own class. Magistrate Edward Close blamed the bushrangers' successful evasion of capture on the ex-convict settlers who transported bushrangers on their boats on the Williams and Patterson's River, and Aboriginal groups with whom they bartered for information and help. Some First Nations people collaborated in the attacks on the invaders' settlements, which the bushrangers seemed dedicated to destroying because they didn't want to have them there either. In this way, their collaborators also contributed to the bushrangers' growing knowledge of the local Hunter Valley terrain. From some homesteads, they stole horses, weapons, clothes, and food. But their persecutors were closing in. Had Molly Morgan become one of Jacob's Irish Brigade's collaborators? After the men left, Joe, Molly, and Irish Frank sat at the table to talk about what had happened.
Thank you, Frank, for warning us about the unexpected guests,
began Molly.
Now, we would appreciate any more information you have about these men so we can best prepare for their next visit.
Well, I'll tell you what I've heard about the lot of them. 4 of the gang were working together on Vickers Jacob's farm. That's Riley, Clinch, Price, and Cleary. They say there's probably 6 of them, because others have their reasons for joining up with them. They don't always go out raiding or visiting together. They haven't got the horses, for one thing. The other 2 I know about were on neighbouring farms. John MacDonald from Sparks Estate and Tom Moss, who was a servant from Francis Moran's in the valley. All of them for about a year. Most are lifers who say they've got nothing to lose. They are young. Aaron Price, the Englishman, is about 21 years old. Paddy Clinch is about 28. And Patrick Riley is in his early 30s. Most of them are Irish. That's why they call themselves Jacob's Irish Brigade.
That's what we've already heard and what we saw for ourselves tonight,
said Joe.
What have you heard about their weapons? What are they carrying?
The settlers and mates have said they took pistols, muskets and ammunition, as well as food, blankets, clothes and boots and whatever they can carry to trade. Like that pretty ring he offered you tonight, Molly.
And horses, Frank. We already know they're hungry and cold and like shiny things. That's nothing,
said Joe, raising his voice.
Well, yes and no, Joe,
Molly said, looking steadily at him.
We have to know what they want so we can keep them on our good side. But horses, Frank, we need to protect our own.
All I have heard is that they steal horses, but they let them go when they get to a new hideout.
They let them go, but they need them to steal supplies from the settlers, as you said, Frank. They can't carry their prizes back to their camp on foot. Even a Londoner knows that.
Horses are easy to track. They respond to approaching horses, and they have to be fed. If there are trackers nearby, especially on horses, they might make a noise and attract the searchers.
I see. So a few of these young gang members walk to the homesteads because they know the area and then steal the horses to carry what they take to their new camp and then release them?
Asked Molly. One rainy evening in late August, there was the sound of a couple of horses entering the barn at Anvil Creek. Irish Frank had again alerted the homestead at Anvil Creek that they may be visited by the Irish gang. Word spread quickly in the bush. Looking through the back door, Molly saw 4 men dismounting hastily from 2 horses. Those who had horses headed them into the barn for food and water. The horses drank and ate quickly. The other man looked on anxiously as Patrick Riley approached Joe and Molly.
"Hello, Patrick. Come in for some food and something to drink,"
offered Molly.
Thank you, but we are in great need and must hurry. We need some horses and supplies. Not your best horses, just the strong and quiet ones. Some of the men don't know how to ride and we need to be on the move.
"But Patrick, how can I do that? This wasn't our agreement,"
said Molly, standing her ground.
Just let us borrow 2 horses so we can move the men and our stores to a safer place. You can say we stole them if anyone asks. One of my men will lead them back after we're settled. Give us a couple of days. I won't tell you where we are, but we won't be too far away.
Patrick's men seemed relieved when Joe brought out food and drink for them to take. What could Molly say? He'd probably take the horses anyway.
Our thanks, Molly and Joe. I hope to see you again,
said Patrick in farewell. They took the food, blankets and other supplies and left as quickly and quietly as they could, riding across the fields around the base of Molly Morgan's Hill and into the bush, which, by then, they knew well. What eventually happened to Jacob's Irish Brigade? Their final forays are a matter of public record, as reported in various colonial newspapers. Molly Morgan was to read a summary of Jacob's Irish Brigade's short bushranging career in The Australian, dated Thursday, 13th of October, 1825.
Jacob's mob, which ranged and pillaged through the area, were the subject of hefty rewards posted for their capture. Francis Allman, the last commandant of Newcastle, sent a detachment of the Royal East Kent Regiment to join August Robert Scott, who had previously captured the gang and jailed them in the Maitland lockup, from which they had famously escaped. Jacob's gang, numbering 5, were finally cornered in a hut near Hexham in October 1825. Leader Patrick Riley was shot and another member, Aaron Price, surrendered. Patrick Clinch, Lawrence Cleary and Michael Cassidy escaped.
Another published report in The Australian states,
On Monday week last, the Bushrangers of Hunter's River, our Newcastle correspondent informs us, were put to the rout. Sergeant Wilcox and Privates Wright and Coffey got intelligence of the haunts of these men and entered on the pursuit accordingly. On approaching within 200 yards of a hut on the farm of Mr. Spark at Wallace's Plains, they observed a man issue from it. Their suspicions were awakened, and on his giving the alarm to persons inside, they were assured that they were correct and that he and his comrades were bushrangers. The sergeant fired into the hut. Patrick Riley, a bushranger, came out, and before he could be laid hold of, fired twice on the soldiers, one of whom, Coffey, returned the fire and shot him dead on the spot. 2 others had also come from the hut. These stood looking on till Riley fell. A man called Price surrendered himself as soon as Riley was shot. They were conducted to the police office and afterwards confined in the jail. Lynch is the name of the man who escaped.
Unfortunately, Molly Morgan's famous rides to Sydney when she was over 70 years old, which were referred to in her obituary, are not dated. Had she made an appeal to Governor Brisbane, with whom she had contact, to save the lives of the remaining men in Jacob's mob who had been condemned to hang? One of the members of Jacob's Irish Brigade's descendants, C.J. Bessel, in his book Jacob's Mob 2021, provides information as to what happened to the condemned men. Their hangings were commuted at the last minute as they stood on the Sydney gallows. They were instead to be transported to Norfolk Island for life, where they were to face their various fates. One was eventually pardoned in 1852. One was murdered after only 2 years on the island. One became a trusted overseer of convicts there in 1846, and the others disappeared from public records. What is officially recorded about Jacob's Irish Brigade members at the time of their last stand is the following. Patrick Riley was 27 when he was shot at Hexham. Aaron Price from Oxford was 21 at the time of his surrender. Patrick Paddy Clinch was 32 and murdered 2 years later on Norfolk Island. Lawrence Cleary was 29 at the time of capture at Hexham. Michael Cassidy, age unknown, was sent with the others after conviction to the Hulk Phoenix at Cockatoo Island, Sydney, for punishment on Norfolk Island. It has been claimed that after the shooting of Patrick Riley and the sentencing of the remaining members of Jacob's Irish Brigade, the Hunter Valley was quiet for a short time. However, this proved to be the relative quiet before the storm. The settlements had no lasting peace. The overland access, large land grants, increasing numbers of assigned convict workers, absentee landlords and free settlers with their precious possessions and guns proved irresistible to other bolters and chancers.
Jacob's Irish Brigade burned briefly and violently across the Hunter. Young men forged by hunger and punishment, bound by belief, leaving behind fear, fragile truces, and debts never settled. Their story ended in gunfire, chains, and silence, but the forces that created them did not end there. In the next episode, we move forward to 1833 to Castle Forbes, where resistance erupted on a far greater scale, and where the colony responded not with negotiation, but with the full weight of the law. Through historical record and creative reconstruction, Narelle Austin will trace the Castle Forbes revolt and step inside the courtroom where survival, guilt and power were argued before sentence was passed. You've been listening to Bushrangers in the Hunter Valley on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.